The 6-year property rule is probably one of the coolest tax saving strategies I think that exist in the Australian tax system. And let me walk you through an example as to how I might actually utilize this in my own personal situation in the coming years. So here's an example of how a 6-year rule could work using my own situation. So back in 2021, myself and my wife, we left our former principal place of residence and we decided to make that an investment property. I've just made up here the assumed value was $500,000 at that point in time. And then we set off to do a rent vesting strategy where we wanted to start acquiring other investment properties and just renting in a location that we necessarily didn't want to buy in, but we wanted to live in at this point in time. We commenced that in 2021. 2022, we'll still rent vesting. 2023, we'll still rent vesting. In 2024, however, we did make a decision to purchase another principal place of residence, which was motivated by a lot of things that were happening in our life, one being having a newborn child. So in 2024, we purchased a new principal place of residence, and this is where the 6-year rule then starts to get interesting, because in where we are right now is at 2025 and then also 2026, we could still ultimately sell our former principal place of residence tax-free, although it has been an investment property since 2021. And on the assumption, let's just assume it was valued at $500,000 in 2021. Let's just assume it had very strong growth through to 2026 and was valued at $1 million now. Essentially, even though it's an investment property, under the 6-year rule, we could still sell that property entirely tax-free. Now, a couple of things to note is if we are to enact the 6-year rule on our former principal place of residence and then we sell it at the 6-year mark or before the 6-year mark comes to an end and we sell that property tax-free, totally legal, and that's how it can apply. But what you need to understand is if you do have a principal place of residence you are now living in at that point in time, of which we do, the period between 2024 to 2026, whatever growth occurs on this property we're currently living in, would inevitably be taxed in future. So let's just assume we maybe purchased at $1 million and by 2026 it's worth $1.2 million. That $200,000 capital gain, if we ever sold this property in future, would be subject to capital gains tax. And that's because how the 6-year rule allows you to do this is you can only claim the main residence exemption on one property at any one point in time in a tax year that you are to sell. So essentially, if we were to sell in 2026, we would have to make the decision of, do we want to utilize the main residence exemption and sell this former principal place of residence, now an investment property, entirely tax-free, or do we want to keep that main residence exemption essentially handy for when, if we were to sell our current principal place of residence down the line, we can then sell that entirely tax-free. This is not something I've made my mind up in terms of what we'll be doing at this point in time. I may well and truly actually still keep to hold this property, but the 6-year rule is incredibly powerful, really important to understand, and I think it is one of the coolest rules or tax saving strategies that can exist in the Australian tax system.